Hey folks, Charlotte for Health.com, and today I want to talk to you about hip tightness and some things that you can do about it. And as a bonus, we're going to talk about how that translates to the golf swing and affects it. So we're going to cover the what, why, and how. Let's start with the what. The hip joint is one of the most fascinating joints in the body, partly because it's got 3 degrees of motion. So if we start with the knee, for example, the knee works primarily in what we call the sagittal plane. It goes front to back. So the knee flexes and extends. Flexes and bends and it extends. Now it does other things. It also rotates, but primarily our knee bends and extends. The hip, on the other hand, works in 3 degrees of motion, similar to what our shoulder does, in that it also bends and extends. So this is hip flexion and extension, but it also abducts and adducts, meaning it moves away from the midline of the body and toward, and then it also rotates. There's internal rotation and external rotation. So how does this translate to the golf swing? Well, the hip actually moves in all 3 planes of motion during the golf swing. And what's really interesting is that whatever is happening on one side, the opposite happens on the other side. So for example, when I get into that backswing here, look at what's happening at the hip joint. So as I'm turning back here, my right side, as a right-handed golfer, my right side, this leg is naturally turning in. So we've got internal rotation here. There's slight flexion here, which means there's slight extension here. There's also some adduction going on, so we have abduction here. So as I'm internally rotating here and externally rotating on this leg in the backswing, as I start to come down, uncoil, generate that power, look at what's happening at that hip joint. Now everything is going in the opposite direction. Now we have on the left side internal rotation, the right side is external rotation, and so forth. All of the opposite movements are happening, but point being, all 3 planes of motion are happening. So what does this actually mean in the golf swing? Well, it can lead to a lot of things. Hip tightness can lead to a decrease in power, which translates into shorter distance on the course. It could lead to certain compensations within the swing itself, and could also lead to possible injury. So let's break each one of those down very quickly here. So if we think a decrease in power here, if we have tightness, let's say as a right golfer, you're tight for internal rotation and you can't get to a full backswing, well, right off the bat, and this is very common for golfers, if you can't get to that full rotation, maybe you only get to here, that translates into less power as you uncoil and start to make your way and make contact to the ball. The further back you are, the more you could get into that full rotation, the more power you could generate. So right off the bat, it can affect some of your distance in the swing. Now, when we think about compensations in the swing, our brain might want to know that, hey, I know I got to get to a certain position here. I want to get to that full thoracic rotation here. If I'm tight here and I could only get to here, your brain might find other ways to get into this or to try and get into this position. It could be coming out of posture, flattening your shoulder plane. It could be any swinging or swaying. Some of these characteristics, more times than not, then translate into casting your club, and even more so, scooping the club. So scooping is when we don't necessarily make that contact and we scoop the ball. And this is one of the leading causes of then getting golfer's elbow. So that's just one of the injuries. But when we also think about risk of injury, if we're not using the appropriate muscles and that hip tightness has led to some kind of weakness and compensation, that's more typical of lower back pain after that. So there's a lot that could happen just due to hip tightness. So what are some things that we could do to help with hip tightness? Well, I want to give you 3 stretches, 1 static, 2 dynamic, that could really help you prepare for that first golf swing. Now, if you are not a golfer, these are still great stretches and great ways for you to warm up, incorporate in your warm up before you work out. For the golfer, we're going to use the golf club, but you could use anything as a balance tool as well. So the first one is a static stretch. This is something that I know I do very often. It's a very common stretch. It's a figure 4 stretch. I like to use the golf club, and again, I like to do things while we're standing up so we don't have to lay down on the ground before we play. So for this one, I'm going to get a nice stretch in the hip. I'm going to, in this case, I got the club in my right hand, left foot crosses over the right knee. I'm going to hinge at the hip here and simply bend into it. It should feel really nice at that hip joint right there. If you feel any pain, then you've gone too deep. Pain is no good. We don't want that. If you, I'm losing my balance here, even with the assistance, if you want to make this a little bit more intense, you could then press down on the knee. So it's a great stretch, a very common stretch. You'll want to hold it for about 20 to 30 seconds. And of course, make sure you do both sides. So that's stretch number one. Now we're going to get a little bit more dynamic. So we're going to get the blood flowing to that hip a little bit more. We're going to get moving a little bit. So again, this will really prepare you for that first swing. This is something called a stork turn. Now this one, I like to use balance. I lose my balance in this one. So in this case, I'll start on my right side. I'm going to take my right foot, put it on the side of my left knee, and I'm going to start turning. So this is a stork turn. So again, this is just a dynamic movement to start to loosen things up. We just want to move around this hip here. It should feel pretty nice. You want to do about 10 on each side. Let's look at the third one now. Now we're going to get moving, and we're going to get the full body moving a little bit and really get you ready for that first swing here. And I love to use the club. You don't need a club, but I like to use it for this one. So we're going to do two separate things here, and it does go pretty quick. The first one is just getting that rotation ready. Something that's very important in the golf swing is that ability to disassociate the upper body and that lower body, especially in that backswing and as we're coming through in that downswing. So let's emulate that with a golf club. I'm going to keep my lower body stable, and I'm simply going to turn. So this is thoracic rotation, and we're just getting ourselves ready for that golf swing. So do about 10 of these on each side. Now I want to incorporate my body into that as well. So instead of just keeping that lower body stable, I'm going to start to shift my feet, and I'm going to move my whole body here. So now you're really warming up a little bit more of full body here. And as a final part of this stretch and dynamic stretch, let's mix those two together. So let's really emulate now that drive here. So I'm going to keep my lower body still for the first part of it. Okay, so I'm going to go stability and then fully mobile. So we keep stable and then we move the whole body. Stable and move the whole body. So this is a really great way to warm up the full body, start to get the body ready for that swing, and again, make sure that you do two sides. So there you have it with regard to hip tightness and some things that you could do either before you get on the golf course or even just before you work out and you want to incorporate into your warm-up. I hope this was helpful. This is Cheryl, Living for Health. Thanks so much for watching.